How do 11 women disappear over 4 years, and nobody notices? Not their families, they noticed. They reported them missing. They begged for help. But police? The media? Society? Nobody connected the dots. Until 2009, when a dog walker in Albuquerque, New Mexico stumbled upon something in the desert. 11 bodies. Buried in the sand. All within 100 yards. This is the story of the West Mesa Bone Collector. A serial killer who hunted for years because society decided his victims didn't matter. February 2, 2009. A woman is walking her dog on the West Mesa, a stretch of desert on the outskirts of Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's a routine walk. She's done it hundreds of times before. But today, her dog starts acting strange. Pulling at the leash. Digging frantically at something in the sand. She pulls the dog back. Looks down at what it's uncovered. And she sees bone. At first, she thinks it's an animal. Coyote. Maybe a deer. But then she sees the femur. The distinctive shape. Human. She calls the police. Within hours, the West Mesa is swarming with investigators. Forensic teams. Cadaver dogs. And what they find is horrifying. Not one body. 11. 11 women. Buried in shallow graves. All within a 100-yard radius. All found on a single stretch of desert that had been empty, undeveloped land for decades. The bodies were skeletal. Years of decomposition. Years of being buried in the sand. But forensic analysis would eventually identify all 11 victims. And when investigators looked at who these women were, when they'd disappeared, and how they'd lived, a pattern emerged. All 11 were connected to Albuquerque's war zone, a neighborhood known for drugs, prostitution, and violence. Most were sex workers. Many struggled with addiction. All had disappeared between 2001 and 2005. And for 4 years their bodies lay buried in the desert while families searched, while some held out hope, while others grieved in uncertainty. This is the story of the West Mesa Bone Collector. A serial killer who operated for years in plain sight. 11 victims. No arrests. No convictions. And a case that remains officially unsolved to this day. Before we go any further, we need to talk about the victims. Because this isn't just a story about a serial killer or an investigation or a mystery. It's a story about 11 human beings. Their names were Virginia Cloven, 24. Syllania Edwards, 15. Monica Candelaria, 22. Victoria Chavez, 26. Doreen Marquez, 28. Julie Nieto, 24. Michelle Valdez, 24. Jamie Barela, 15. Cinnamon Elks, 32. Veronica Romero, 28. Evelyn Salazar, 27. These women came from difficult circumstances. Many had been in and out of foster care. Many had experienced abuse, physical, sexual, emotional. Many turned to drugs as a way to cope with trauma. And many ended up in sex work, not as a choice, but as survival. They were mothers, daughters, sisters. Michelle Valdez was 7 months pregnant when she disappeared. She'd been excited about becoming a mother. She'd picked out baby clothes. Virginia Cloven was trying to get clean. She'd enrolled in a program. She was calling her mother regularly for the first time in years. 2 of the victims, Syllania Edwards and Jamie Barela, were just 15 years old. Children. And when they disappeared, their families reported them missing. They begged police for help. They searched the streets themselves. They put up flyers. They called hospitals and jails. But in most cases, the response was the same. She's an adult. She'll turn up. These women go missing all the time. This is what's known as the missing. A term that describes people who disappear, but whose cases aren't prioritized because of who they are. Sex workers. Drug users. Runaways. People from marginalized communities. Society has decided, consciously or unconsciously, that certain lives matter less. That certain disappearances aren't worth investigating as urgently. And that failure to prioritize these cases gave a serial killer 4 years to operate. 4 years to kill 11 women. 4 years before anyone realized there was a pattern. When the bodies were discovered in 2009, families who had been told she'll turn up finally got answers. But those answers came too late. Too late to save their daughters. Too late to catch the killer in the act. Too late to prevent this tragedy. The burial site told investigators a lot about the killer. The location was isolated, 4 miles west of Albuquerque's city center, on undeveloped desert land. You could drive there at night and encounter almost no one. But it wasn't completely remote. It was accessible. 15 minutes from the war zone where the victims were last seen. All 11 bodies were found within a 100-yard radius. Some graves were just feet apart. This wasn't random. This was a chosen burial ground. A specific location the killer returned to again and again. That tells us the killer was comfortable here. Familiar with the area. Confident they wouldn't be discovered. The graves were shallow, 2 to 3 feet deep. The bodies were buried fully clothed. This wasn't where they were killed. This was where they were disposed of. Based on decomposition and when the women disappeared, forensic experts determined the burials occurred between 2001 and 2005. 4 years of active killing. Roughly 1 victim every 4 to 5 months. And then, sometime in 2005 or early 2006, the killing stopped. Why? Did the killer die? Get arrested for something else? Move away? Or did they just stop using this burial ground? Investigators didn't know. But they did know one thing: whoever did this was organized, methodical, and local. And the investigation to find them was about to begin. The discovery of 11 bodies changed everything. The Albuquerque Police Department immediately formed the West Mesa Task Force. The FBI joined. The case became the highest priority in the city. But they were already years behind. Because here's the question everyone asks when they learn about this case. How did 11 women disappear over 4 years, and no one realized there was a pattern? Let me walk you through the timeline. 2001, Virginia Cloven goes missing. 1 missing sex worker. Police note it. File it. Move on. 2002, Syllania Edwards vanishes. She's 15. A runaway. The case goes cold after a few weeks. 2003, Monica Candelaria, Victoria Chavez, Doreen Marquez, and Julie Nieto all disappear. 4 women. Same year. Same area. Same profile. And still, no one connects the cases. 2004, Michelle Valdez. Jamie Barela. Cinnamon Elks. Veronica Romero. 4 more women vanish. By the end of 2004, 10 women have disappeared from the war zone in 3 years. 10. And still no task force. No pattern recognition. No alarm bells. 2005, Evelyn Salazar. The 11th and final victim. So why didn't anyone connect these cases? First, because the victims were marginalized. Sex workers. Drug users. In the eyes of the system, their disappearances weren't urgent. Second, because APD didn't have a system for tracking patterns. Each missing person report was treated individually. No one was looking at the big picture. Third, because some women weren't reported missing for weeks or months. By then, trails were cold. And fourth, because even when families begged for help, they were often dismissed. This failure gave the killer 4 years to operate undetected. And by 2009, when the bodies were found, critical time had been lost. Evidence had degraded. Witnesses had scattered. The killer might have been long gone. But investigators did have one thing: the crime scene itself. And tips were starting to come in. Names of men who fit the profile. Men with histories of violence against women. Men who lived near the burial site. And one name kept appearing over and over. The FBI's behavioral analysis unit built a profile of the killer. Male. Almost certainly. Serial killers who target women are overwhelmingly men. Local to Albuquerque. Someone who knew the area. Who understood the geography of the West Mesa and the war zone. Someone with access to a vehicle. The burial site was remote enough that you couldn't walk there carrying a body. Someone comfortable with sex workers. Maybe a client. Maybe someone who posed as law enforcement. Someone who could approach these women without raising suspicion. And someone organized. The burial ground showed planning. The same location used repeatedly. Bodies buried carefully enough that they went undetected for years. This was a methodical predator. As tips poured in and detectives reviewed old case files, several suspects emerged. Men who'd been arrested for violence against women. Men who lived near the burial site. Men who frequented the war zone. I'm going to tell you about two of them, because these are the men investigators focused on. And one of them is almost certainly the West Mesa Bone Collector. The first suspect, Joseph Blee. A serial rapist with a long history of targeting sex workers. He lived in Albuquerque during the entire period when women disappeared. He had direct access to the West Mesa. When he was arrested in 2009 for another rape, investigators searched his property, collected DNA, interviewed him extensively. He denied involvement. And despite the circumstantial connections, there was no physical evidence linking him to the murders. No DNA match. No witnesses. Blee was convicted of the 2009 rape. He's serving 36 years in prison. But he was never charged with the West Mesa murders. He remains a person of interest. But most investigators don't think he's the killer. Because there's another suspect who fits even better. A man whose connections to the case are so strong, so specific, that many believe he's almost certainly responsible. The problem is, that suspect is dead. His name was Lorenzo Montoya. And he died in 2006, 3 years before the bodies were ever discovered. Lorenzo Montoya died in December 2006. He was shot and killed by the boyfriend of a woman he was strangling. He died 3 years before anyone knew there was a serial killer in Albuquerque. Which means he was never questioned. Never investigated. Never held accountable. But when investigators discovered the West Mesa bodies and began reviewing old cases, Montoya's name came up. And the connections were impossible to ignore. First, Lorenzo Montoya's family owned property on the West Mesa. Not just near the burial site. Directly adjacent to it. Less than 200 yards from where the bodies were found. Montoya had unrestricted access to this property. He visited frequently. He knew the area better than almost anyone. If you wanted to bury bodies somewhere you felt comfortable, somewhere you wouldn't be disturbed, your family's isolated property would be perfect. Second, the timeline matches perfectly. The victims disappeared between 2001 and 2005. Montoya lived in Albuquerque during that entire period. And the killings stopped in late 2005 or early 2006, right when Montoya's behavior became erratic, culminating in his death in December 2006. Third, his victim profile. In December 2006, Montoya lured a woman, a sex worker from the war zone, to a location and began strangling her. The exact same victim profile as the 11 West Mesa victims. The exact same method, strangulation. The FBI reviewed the case. They looked at Lorenzo Montoya. And they concluded he was a strong suspect. Possibly the suspect. But they'll never be able to prove it. Because Montoya is dead. His body was cremated. There's no DNA to collect and compare. You can't interview a dead man. You can't search his property, it was sold years ago. You can't get a confession. You can build a circumstantial case. You can say, this person fits every element of the profile. But you can't prove it beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. And that's the tragedy of this case. The killer is probably dead. He died before anyone even knew there was a serial killer. He'll never face trial. Never be convicted. Never serve time for what he did. Not everyone is convinced Montoya or Blee is responsible. There are other theories. Some investigators have suggested multiple killers. What if several men used this burial ground, sharing information about where to dispose of bodies? It sounds far-fetched. But the consistency of the victims and burial method makes this unlikely. Others have raised the possibility of organized crime. The war zone was controlled by gangs and drug dealers. Maybe these women witnessed something. Maybe they owed money. But organized crime killings are usually quick, sending a message. The West Mesa burials were careful. Hidden. That suggests a personal motive. The most likely scenario remains a single serial killer. Someone local. Someone who knew the war zone. Someone who had access to the West Mesa. Joseph Blee fits that profile. But Lorenzo Montoya fits it better. Here's the fundamental problem. Even if investigators are right about who did this, even if Lorenzo Montoya is the killer, they'll never be able to prove it. Because the evidence doesn't exist. The bodies were in the desert for 4 to 8 years. DNA degraded. Physical evidence scattered. There are no murder weapons. No witnesses. No surveillance footage. The women disappeared from a chaotic neighborhood where no one pays attention. The burial site was in the middle of nowhere. And the primary suspect is dead. Even if Montoya is the killer, there's no way to charge him. No way to bring him to trial. The families will never get a conviction. Never hear a confession. Never watch someone be sentenced. As of today, February 2026, the West Mesa murders remain officially unsolved. The task force still exists, though it's much smaller. Tips still come in occasionally. But realistically, this case will never be solved. In 2019, the FBI did a comprehensive review. Their conclusion: Lorenzo Montoya is the most likely suspect. But without physical evidence, the case can't be closed definitively. So what does unsolved mean in practice? It means the families live with uncertainty. They believe they know what happened. Many believe Montoya is responsible. But belief isn't the same as legal closure. It means living in the space between knowing and proving. Between suspicion and certainty. Based on the evidence, here's what probably happened. Between 2001 and 2005, a man in Albuquerque was targeting sex workers from the war zone. He was local. He knew the area. He may have been a client, someone the women recognized and didn't fear. He would pick them up, drive them somewhere isolated, and kill them, most likely by strangulation. Then he would transport their bodies to the West Mesa. To a burial ground he had chosen carefully. A place he knew well. A place his family owned. He did this 11 times over 4 years. And then he stopped. In December 2006, he tried to kill again. He picked up a woman from the war zone and began strangling her. But this time, someone intervened. And he was shot and killed. That man was Lorenzo Montoya. If you ask most investigators, if you ask the FBI, they'll tell you. Lorenzo Montoya is almost certainly the West Mesa Bone Collector. The geographic connection is too strong. The timeline too perfect. The method too consistent. Could it be someone else? It's possible. But it's not likely. And that's the most frustrating part. The killer is probably dead. He died before anyone knew there was a serial killer. He'll never face trial. Never be convicted. Justice, in the traditional sense, will never be served. The families haven't given up. Michelle Valdez's mother still speaks publicly about the case. She attends vigils. She advocates for other families of missing persons. Other families hold memorial services. They support each other. They remember together. Because even if the case is never officially solved, they refuse to let their daughters be forgotten. After the West Mesa murders became public, there was intense scrutiny. The Albuquerque Police Department made changes. Improved their missing persons database. Better training. New protocols. Those changes are good. They are necessary. But they came too late for the 11 women buried on the West Mesa. And the question remains, has anything really changed? The war zone still exists. Women still work the streets. Women still go missing. And vulnerable people are still marginalized. Their reports are still sometimes dismissed. The West Mesa murders should have been a wake-up call. But has society really woken up? I want to end this where we began. With the women. Because this case isn't really about Lorenzo Montoya or investigative failures or forensic limitations. It's about 11 human beings who had their lives stolen from them. Virginia Cloven. 24 years old. A mother. Someone's daughter. Syllania Edwards. 15 years old. A child. Monica Candelaria. 22 years old. Victoria Chavez. 26 years old. Doreen Marquez. 28 years old. A mother who loved her children. Julie Nieto. 24 years old. Michelle Valdez. 24 years old. Pregnant. Excited about becoming a mother. Jamie Barela. 15 years old. Another child. Cinnamon Elks. 32 years old. Veronica Romero. 28 years old. Evelyn Salazar. 27 years old. These women were vulnerable. They were marginalized. They were ignored. But they were people. They had families who loved them. They had dreams. They had potential. They deserved safety. They deserved protection. And they deserved justice. The West Mesa murders exposed how society treats certain people. Sex workers. Drug users. Poor women. Women from bad neighborhoods. When they disappear, the response is often, well, what did you expect? As if their circumstances mean they are disposable. But they are not. Every single one of them matters. So what can you do? If someone you know goes missing, anyone, regardless of their circumstances, don't stop pushing. Advocate. Make noise. Demand attention. Support organizations that help vulnerable communities. Sex worker advocacy groups. Addiction recovery programs. Missing persons networks. And when you hear about cases like this, cases involving people society has deemed less than, don't dismiss them. Pay attention. Share their stories. Remember their names. The West Mesa murders will likely never be officially solved. Lorenzo Montoya is dead. The evidence is gone. The legal system has reached its limits. But the families remember. The community remembers. And now, you remember too. Virginia Cloven. Syllania Edwards. Monica Candelaria. Victoria Chavez. Doreen Marquez. Julie Nieto. Michelle Valdez. Jamie Barela. Cinnamon Elks. Veronica Romero. Evelyn Salazar. 11 women. 11 lives. 11 stories that matter. Rest in peace. This is Forgotten Crime HQ. Like, share and subscribe for more forgotten cases. Thank you for watching.